Howdy, folks. It's your friend Max Mogren reporting live for you here at Wake Up News. This is Wake Up Wyoming. We got a big show for you today. A lot going on in the world. As usual, we're going to take a good look at the Jackson Hole Daily, but it's not very informative today, so I've got a lot of other articles loaded up on my smartphone as well. As you can see in our headline today, serious volatility as usual in the cryptocurrency markets. Bitcoin down about 6%, 4% now, very volatile. Ethereum down 3%, Litecoin up 3%. But the big winner today seems to be Bitcoin Cash, an offshoot of Bitcoin that was up 80% earlier this morning, 80% in 24 hours, now currently hovering at 46% up, okay? Important to note the extreme volatility in the cryptocurrency markets. If you want to play that game, don't put any more money into it than you're capable of losing, because this seems like there's really no rhyme or reason to it. And that leads me to our, the question there answered in the headline: are cryptocurrencies a Trojan horse in the war on cash? What's up, Karen J. Bowden? Thanks for tuning in. Hey, Tim Schwartz. Hey, Alan Morningstar. Appreciate all of you here today. Now, like I said, cryptocurrencies, Devin's calling it Bitcoin poker, right? It's a huge casino with the cryptocurrencies. And as I've done more research on this topic, I've found that it's really easy to buy cryptocurrencies. It's really easy to transfer money, to exchange money between cryptocurrencies and play that game in the Bitcoin poker stock market, whatever you want to call it. It's a casino. So if you're going to get into cryptocurrencies, be careful. I've been trying to make sense of it. There's not really much rhyme or reason to it. But notably in the last couple months, the cryptocurrency markets have gone absolutely insane, where you'll see stuff spike and drop, but it'll hover usually higher than it was before and then spike again. It's pretty wild. But I've got an interesting article here by James Richards of the Daily Reckoning: Why Elites Are Winning the War on Cash. Okay, I'm going to read you this. Visa recently unveiled its own offensive in the war on cash. Visa is offering certain merchants a $10,000 reward if they refuse to accept cash in the future. Not surprisingly, Visa's competitor is also part of the war on cash. MasterCard is increasing its effort to encourage merchants to refuse cash. Here's Bloomberg quoting the CEO of MasterCard. MasterCard CEO Ajay Banga has been one of the most ardent supporters of ditching paper currency in the U.S. The 57-year-old first declared his war on cash in 2010. These private efforts by Visa and MasterCard exist side by side with official efforts to eliminate and discourage the use of cash coming from governments in India, Australia, Sweden, as well as the United States. These efforts are always portrayed in the most favorable light. Private parties talk about convenience and lower costs. Governments talk about putting pressure on tax cheats, terrorists, of course, and criminals. Governments always use money laundering, drug dealing, and terrorism as an excuse to keep tabs on honest citizens and deprive them of the ability to use money alternatives such as physical cash and gold. But the so-called cashless society is just a Trojan horse for a system in which all financial wealth is electronic and represented digitally in the records of a small number of mega banks and asset managers. Once that is achieved, it will be easy for state power to seize and freeze the wealth, or subject it to constant surveillance, taxation, and other forms of digital confiscation. The war on cash has two main thrusts. The first is to make it difficult to obtain cash in the first place. U.S. banks will report anyone taking more than $3,000 in cash as engaging in suspicious activity using a Treasury form SAR. The second thrust is to eliminate large denomination banknotes. The U.S. got rid of its $500 note in 1969, and the $100 note has lost 85% of its purchasing power since then. With a little more inflation, the $100 bill will be reduced to chump change. What's up? Thanks for all the stuff. Bitcoin news. Devin's chiming in, enjoying the much ATM. Central Indiana. JT Jones, what's up? So yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Now it's interesting, we've got the big, like Visa, MasterCard, big digital payment processors declaring an open war on cash. At the same time, we've got these cryptocurrencies that came online around 2009, really started ramping up 2011. Now we see this extreme volatility in the cryptocurrency markets. I'm curious to wonder, do people think, do you, the viewers and readers of Wake Up News, think that cryptocurrencies are the solution to the problem of the war on cash, or are they a Trojan horse? That's a good question. Interestingly, on the topic, CNBC reporting today that extreme right groups turn to the shadow economy. Okay, recently, some of the people associated with the right Unite the Right march in Charlottesville had their PayPal account shut down. They had their, they had all these things, their domain names blocked, their domain names dropped, their accounts on social media shut down, and their payment processing systems frozen. So now today, CNBC reporting extreme right groups shunned by payment processors and traditional companies are turning to novel methods to solicit donations. One rightist said he is planning a website where supporters can make monthly donations anonymously to their cause. The site would avoid mainstream processors like PayPal and will accept Bitcoin donations, he said. So it's interesting, the mainstream, we saw yesterday on the show here, legislation in the U.S. and the U.K. that seems to be geared against Bitcoin, against the cryptocurrencies, the decentralized, non-governmentally, non-private central bank-controlled alternative currencies. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But I'd love to get your comments. If you got any info for me or for the rest of us, put it in the links or put it in the comments, please, on the topic of cryptocurrencies. Very important topic. A lot going on there these days. Moving on to Charlottesville, okay? Utter insanity surrounding Charlottesville. Still, yesterday's Jackson Hole Daily, the paper that services the wealthiest county per capita in North America. 10 articles and one political cartoon on Charlottesville. Not necessarily about what actually happened there, but about Trump's comments on Charlottesville. Okay, the event being used to push an agenda. And interestingly, Zero Hedge reporting yesterday, why was this crowd hire company recruiting $25 an hour political activists in Charlottesville last week? Trump ignited a political firestorm yesterday during an impromptu press conference in which he said there was blame on both sides for the tragic events that occurred in Charlottesville over the weekend. Now, the discovery of a Craigslist ad posted last Monday, almost a full week before the Charlottesville protests, is raising new questions over whether paid protesters were sourced by a Los Angeles-based public relations firm specializing in innovative events to serve as agitators in counter-protests. The ad was posted by a company called Crowds on Demand and offered $25 an hour to actors and photographers to participate in events in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. While the ad didn't explicitly define a role to be filled by its crowd of actors and photographers, it did ask applicants to comment on whether they were okay with participating in peaceful protests. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, Apple Pay, PayPal cut off sites linked to white supremacists. That's coming from CNET today. And my stance on that, obviously, I am not a white supremacist, right? There really aren't that many white supremacists, overt white supremacists in this country. Obviously, there is some deeply rooted systemic racism, which is why we see such a high percentage of African Americans in prison, for example, and racism against the Native Americans, systemic racism, whereas these overt neo-Nazi or KKK types are really not that common, right? I like to quote Voltaire on this. I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to your death the right to say it. Okay, free speech is a lot more important than shutting up a few clowns, right? And it seems like this is being used, the Charlottesville situation is being used to crack down on dissent, on free speech of all types online. So it's pretty disturbing. Interestingly, USA Today reporting that white nationalists are planning a rally in Lexington, Kentucky to oppose the removal of statues. In the wake of the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, white nationalists reportedly plan to gather in Lexington to oppose the planned removal of Confederate statues. Matthew Heimbach, chairman of the Traditionalist Worker Party, who is no stranger to Kentucky, told the Lexington Herald leader people in the area asked his group to get involved. He said the goal is to have the rally sooner rather than later. Okay, so check Lexington. I just noticed, I think it was Durham, North Carolina. There's a live stream about a counter protest. They've got the helicopter flying. So there's all this stuff going on. Maximilian Rothschild chiming in, divide, distract, conquer. Exactly. I'm sure we're going to see more of this alt-right versus alt-right left nonsense in the mainstream. No shortage of it, fomenting distraction and division amongst the people. Instead of fighting amongst ourselves, we should be focused on the deep systemic problems, the so-called deep state that Oliver Stone talked about to Hollywood Reporter the other day, saying that it's a much bigger deal than Donnie Trump. You know, Donnie Trump, the perfect fall guy, the perfect excuse, the perfect clown for everybody to point fingers at and laugh or be terrified or disgusted, whereas he's just a symptom of the whole overall situation. He's not the cause of it, right? Coming from the Mises Institute, while we're on the topic of fake news, the Society of the Spectacle, divide, distract, and conquer tactics carried out by the mainstream media. Before fake news, America invented pseudo-events by Ryan McMacken. In the wake of the Charlottesville riot, it's been interesting how quickly the focus has shifted away from the actual events in Charlottesville and toward the public pundits and intellectuals expressing opinions about the events. Already, the media has lost interest in analyzing the details of the event itself and are instead primarily reporting on what Donald Trump, his allies, and his enemies have to say about it. This is an important distinction in coverage. Rather than attempt to supply a detailed look at who was at the event, what was done, and what the participants from both sides have to say about it, we are instead exposed primarily to what people in Washington, D.C., and the political class in general think about the events in which they were not directly involved. This focus illustrates what has long been a bias among the reporters and pundits in the national media, a bias towards focus on the national intellectual class rather than on events that take place outside the halls of official power. Note, however, that those quoted rarely have any special knowledge about the events themselves. Their opinions are covered not because they are knowledgeable, but because their quotations fit easily into a narrative that the media wishes to perpetuate. Okay, that about sums it up. Again, yesterday's Jackson Hole Daily mainstream coverage coast to coast is all about Trump's comments on Charlottesville, not what actually happened there, right? And if you've watched the, whatever, it's all a distraction. But if you've watched Trump's comments, if you've watched like the live, or not live, but the recorded broadcast of what he said, he didn't really side with the white nationalists. He didn't really side with the right. All he said was that there was blame on both sides. And anybody who's watched the coverage of those events can see that's true. There were people waving Nazi flags and hitting people over the head with billy clubs, spraying them with pepper spray. Same thing with the counter protesters, right? There is blame on both sides. From a very objective standpoint, you don't have to pick a side and say these people were right, these people were wrong, to acknowledge that, wow, a lot of people got together and made a bunch of asses of themselves fighting in the streets, right? So, sad. Thank you all for tuning in. Lots of comments. Really appreciate it. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep rolling along here. Another interesting perspective on the Charlottesville situation coming from the Black Agenda Report. This is an article written by 2016 Green Party vice presidential candidate Ajamu Baraka, who's also an editor and contributing writer at the Black Agenda Report. Okay? His article, The Story of Charlottesville, was written in blood in the Ukraine. While I recognize the danger of the violent right-wing movement, I am more concerned with the right-wing policies that are being enacted into law and policy by both Democrats and Republicans. What is the character of racist right-wing politics today? Is it the crazed white supremacist who plows into an anti-fascist demonstration in Charlottesville, Virginia? Or can it also be the assurance by Lindsey Graham that an attack against North Korea would result in thousands of lives lost? But those lives will be over there. What about the recent unanimous resolution by both houses of Congress in support of Israel and criticism of the United Nations for its alleged anti-Israeli bias? Would that qualify as racist and right-wing, since it appears that the ongoing suffering of the Palestinians is of no concern? And what about the vote by the U.S. House of Representatives to go even beyond the obscene proposal of the Trump administration to increase the military budget by $54 billion and instead add a whopping $74 billion to the Pentagon budget? Daniel Reichert chiming in with a good comment, there no longer exist two parties. Totally true, right? Republicans, Democrats, two wings of the same fucked up bird, terrorizing the planet. What I find interesting about the current discussion around what many are referring to as the emboldening of the radical white supremacist rest is how easy it is to mobilize opposition against the crude and overt white supremacists we saw in Charlottesville. So easy, in fact, that it's really a distraction from the more difficult and dangerous work that needs to be done to confront the real right-wing power brokers. The white supremacy that some of us see as more insidious is not reflected in the simple, stereotypical images of the angry Nazi saluting alt-righter or even Donald Trump. Instead, it is the normalized and thus invisible white supremacist ideology inculcated into cultural and educational institutions and the policies that stem from those ideas. That process doesn't just produce the stormtroopers of the armed and crazed radical right, but also such covert true believers as Robert Rubin from Goldman Sachs, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, the white supremacist, Tony Blair, and Nancy Pelosi. Decent individuals who have never questioned for a moment the superiority of white civilization, who believe completely in the white West's right and responsibility to determine which nations should have sovereignty and who should be the leaders of lesser nations, and who believe that there is no alternative to the wonders of global capitalism, even if it means that billions of human beings are consigned permanently to what Fanon called the zone of non-being. The political impact of the right gaining power in Ukraine could not be isolated from the growing power of the right elsewhere. This is the white supremacy that I am concerned with, and while I recognize the danger of the violent right-wing movement, I am more concerned with the right-wing policies that are being enacted into law and policy by both Democrats and Republicans at every level of government. More than 2 years ago, the writer here wrote, "The brutal repression and dehumanization witnessed across Europe in the 1930s has not found generalized expression in the U.S. and Europe, at least not yet. Nevertheless, large sectors of the U.S. and European left appear to be unable to recognize that the U.S. NATO EU axis that is committed to maintaining the hegemony of Western capital is resulting in dangerous collaborations with rightist forces both inside and outside of governments." The impetus of that article was to critique the inherent danger of the Obama administration's cynical manipulation of right-wing racist elements in Ukraine to overthrow the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. Not only was it dangerous and unpredictably disastrous for the Ukrainian people, but because U.S. support for a neo-fascist movement in Ukraine took place within the context in which the political right was gaining legitimacy and strength across Europe. The political impact of the right gaining power in Ukraine could not be isolated from the growing power of the right elsewhere. which meant that the Obama administration's selfish short-term objective to undermine Russia in Ukraine had the effect of empowering the right and shifting the balance of forces towards the right throughout Europe. But because Obama was incorrectly seen as a liberal, he was able to avoid most criticism of his policies in Ukraine, in Europe, and domestically. In fact, liberals and the left, both in the U.S. and Europe, generally supported his Ukraine policies. Obama putting a neo-Nazi right-wing group in power in the Ukraine. The U.S. has become a dangerous right-wing society as a result of a steady shift to the right over the past 4 decades. However, playing footsie with right-wing elements in the Ukraine and underestimating the growing power of the right has resulted in powerful and dangerous right-wing movements on both sides of the Atlantic who have effectively exploited endemic white racism and the contradictions of neoliberal capitalist globalizations. The ascendancy of Donald Trump cannot be decontextualized from the late racial, class, and gender politics of this movement here and beyond. Almost done with this article. I know it's a long one, but it's good. The alt-right that showed up in Charlottesville this past weekend was mimicking the tactics of the frontline neo-fascist soldiers who orchestrated the coup in the Ukraine. Yet everyone is saying this is the result of Trump. The objective fact is that the U.S. has become a dangerous right-wing society as a result of a steady shift to the right over the past 4 decades. The idea that Trump's election somehow created the right cannot be taken seriously and cannot be reduced to the crude expressions of the alt-right. Jane chiming in, you know that politicians are just puppets. It doesn't matter where you side, either Republican or Democrat, they're being told and being used by someone else, like the Federal Reserve Bank or the New World Order. Roger that, Jane, says Daniel Reichert. I agree with you completely. Interestingly, it's kind of funny on the topic of the Ukraine, right? The U.S. empowered the Ukraine. Consortium News reporting today, a Ukraine link to North Korea's missiles. By orchestrating the 2014 regime change in Ukraine, U.S. neocons may have indirectly contributed to a desperate Ukrainian factory selling advanced rocket engines to North Korea and endangering America. Okay, so the law of unintended consequences, right? Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Of course, North Korea, rather conveniently, they're not going to really bomb the U.S. They're not going to launch nukes at the U.S. or Guam or Hawaii anytime soon, but it sure helps keep people scared, right? I really appreciate all the comments there. Maximilian Rothschild chiming in. It's a good comment. Thank you. So that's what we got. The Charlottesville situation, to my eye, the whole thing looks staged, or at least the Unite the Right thing. The Vice coverage makes it look like a staged event. Okay. Naturally, if you bring a bunch of white supremacists into a town, a university town, a well-educated university town with a large percentage of minority populations, of course, you're going to have a big shitstorm ensue. And the media was there happy to cover it, lap it up. Daniel Reichert chiming in, smoke and mirrors. Absolutely right. Moving on, I got a couple stories on cybersecurity here today. As you saw there in my headline, Assange vows to prove the DNC leaks didn't come from Russia. That's in there. But UPI reporting University of Washington students can hack smart devices and track people's movements. Okay, that's capable. A bunch of college kids, computer science students at the University of Washington, have found a way to remotely hack into persons' personal devices, such as cell phones and smart TVs, to track individual movements, raising serious security questions, the university announced Wednesday. Okay, this isn't news to any of us. But the fact that a group of computer science students at the University of Washington can do it shows just how easy it is, right? Another report from the UPI, modern cars' components can be hacked. Okay, we're in the era of the self-driving car. It's coming. It's on the horizon. It's already here. The technology's already out there. The new Teslas and cars from other companies have self-driving capabilities. Not all of them, but some of them. And literally, once the laws are changed, these things will be able to drive themselves around. But unfortunately, modern cars' electronic components, including safety features, are susceptible to hacks, according to researchers. Okay, so if you're a political activist, you probably don't want to buy yourself a self-driving car anytime soon. If you're a renegade lawyer or journalist who's out there trying to stick it to the man in some way, I think a self-driving car would be a real easy way to assassinate someone, right? Coming out of Europe, Reuters, Scottish Parliament is undergoing ongoing brute force cyber attacks, but they have not breached their defenses. Goes on. And then the headline in my description here, antiwar.com reporting Assange meets with U.S. lawmakers, vows to prove that the DNC leaks did not come from Russia. Okay, remember how long that was in the news cycle, right? It went from covering the content of Hillary Clinton's emails, right? All that bullshit, to, oh, wait, Trump and the Russians hacked the DNC, but actually it was that Seth Rich guy that leaked it, and then he got whacked by the Clinton administration. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange met with a member of the U.S. Congress for the first time Wednesday, as Rep. Dana Rohrabaugh, a Republican from California, met him during a 3-hour gathering at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. During the meeting, Assange assured Rohrabaugh that Russia was not the source of DNC leaks, which WikiLeaks published during the 2016 campaign related to the Democratic Party, and he promised to provide specific information to prove that. I saw something this morning, supposedly he's going on MSNBC or something, so I don't know. But again, like Daniel Reichert was saying earlier, smoke and mirrors, right? The politicians really don't have that much control. The old Frank Zappa quote, politics is the entertainment division of the military-industrial complex. Moving along. International warmongering. Another one from antiwar.com. Our hearts go out to the Yemeni people. They call it a civil war. You know, the Western media calls it a civil war in Yemen. But the Saudi Arabians are the ones launching airstrikes. Throughout 2016, the UN High Commission for Refugees counted 3,936 airstrikes against Yemen. The newly released figures for the first half of 2017 show that previous figure, which covered an entire year, is already far surpassed, with 5,676 airstrikes against Yemen by Saudi Arabia launched by the end of June. Okay, that's already 2 months old, that statistic. This has turned an already catastrophic humanitarian situation with thousands killed in airstrikes into an ever-mounting disaster, with the new strikes killing yet more civilians, and strikes so intense in some areas as to displace much of the civilian population. Being an internally displaced person isn't great wherever you are, but in Yemen, it's all but a death sentence, as a Saudi naval blockade is keeping food and medicine shipments to the country to a bare minimum, worsening a cholera epidemic and leaving much of the population on the brink of starvation. Aid group Oxfam estimated that over 500,000 children in Yemen are already suffering from severe malnutrition because of the blockade, and there are no signs of the situation improving anytime soon. Indeed, Hodeidah, the last port that has access to the country's north, is nearly constantly under siege, with the Saudis seeking to transfer it to the control of the country's government. Okay, so our hearts go out to the Yemeni people as they're being bombed back into the Stone Age by the Saudis. South China Morning Post reporting a sharp rise in Chinese food exports to North Korea as starving nation leans heavily on its only ally. Okay, the new sanctions, the new UN sanctions against North Korea. It sucks, Politics aside, I feel bad for the people who are directly affected by these things. It's a very serious situation. We see it in Yemen. We see it in North Korea. We see it in Venezuela, even here in the Western Hemisphere, here in South America. But Trump recently blustering about North Korea, obviously also talking about a trade war with China. That trade war has been canceled, not surprisingly, given how tightly we are dependent on China for all our plastic spatulas and stuff. But moving along here, wow, I lost my place. Pardon me. Chinese food exports to North Korea, both staples and snacks, have increased massively over the past year, hinting at the isolated regime's growing reliance on its only ally. Chinese customs data showed a surge in exports of nearly 30 items, with corn increasing 32-fold from 400 tons to nearly 12,724 tons. Bananas from just over 63 tons to 1,156 tons. And wheat powder from less than 0.6 tons to 7.6 tons. Interestingly, spirit exports from China to North Korea also more than quadrupled, rising from 2.1 million liters to 9.5 million in the second quarter compared to the previous year. So there we go. While we're on the topic of sanctions and embargoes and economic warfare against countries that the West deems illegitimate. The Maduro diet. Venezuelans suffer drastic weight loss as hunger crisis strikes. Shortages are becoming ever more severe in Venezuela. As Deutsche Welle reports, according to the World Health Organization's hospitals lack 95% of necessary medicines. Many people are undernourished and they receive no help from the government. An estimated 75% of Venezuelans lost at least 10 kilos, that's 22 pounds, in the last year because there is not enough food to go around. People here call it the Maduro diet. When we say people are eating from the garbage, we are not joking. It's our reality. People don't have enough to eat. Furthermore, a lack of food and basic services is also creating an education crisis, with more than 1 million children no longer attending school due to lack of food, running water, and or electricity. So there we go. There's your news. But, stuff like that can't happen here in the U.S., right? Well, not entirely true. Zero Hedge putting out an article recently. 1 in 7 New York City public school students experiences homelessness. Despite promising to do everything in his power to improve the quality of life for New York City's most economically vulnerable residents, Mayor Bill de Blasio has instead presided over one of the largest expanses of homelessness in New York City history. Over the past 2 years, the population of homeless students in New York City's public schools has exploded, increasing by 20% between the 2015-16 school year and the 2016-17 school year, which concluded in June. There are now more than 140,000 homeless public school students, according to the Atlas of Student Homelessness, an annual study conducted by the Institute for Children, Poverty, and Homelessness. At any given time, roughly 9% of New York City public school students are homeless. Another 4% were currently housed but had experienced homelessness at some point since the 2010-2011 school year. Furthermore, 1 in 7 New York City students will have been homeless at least temporarily during their tenure. So, that sucks. But silver linings, we got one good story that I found today out of the UPI of a government trying to do good. Los Angeles to begin paying homeowners to build second dwellings for homeless. The huge homelessness problem in Southern California due to the economic factors and, of course, the climate there, rather conducive to homeless people since it's such a mild climate. The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors voted Tuesday to give homeowners between $50,000 and $75,000 to build second dwellings on their property in an effort to house more homeless people. The pilot program passed by a vote of 4-0 and will begin with an allocated amount of $550,000. according to the LA Daily News. So not that much initially going into its program, but hopefully it grows. Officials said the program will roll out slowly as a way to test its feasibility. In a letter recommending the program's approval, Richard Buckner, the director of the LA County Department of Regional Planning, said the initiative will begin to review and approve designs for the additional units, provide incentives and their further construction, and promote the program. The county program comes after the state passed a law easing restrictions on building second units, informally referred to as back houses or granny flats, in order to combat the rising homelessness rate in California. According to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, California typically has approximately 118,000 people experiencing homelessness on an average night, the highest rate in the country, and 30,000 more than New York, in second place. In Los Angeles, the number of homeless on the average night is about 47,000. Okay, so 47,000 homeless people on the streets of LA every night. If you live in LA, look into this program. Maybe you get yourself 50, 70 grand to build a unit on the back of your house to house low-income people. It's funny, when I was living in Culver City, which is part of LA, working with Michael C. Rupert, we were based out of what you could call a granny unit in the back of a house. It was a nice setup. Similarly, here in Jackson Hole, this place, the wealthiest county per capita, clearly the highest disparity in wealth in the country, I would say. Granny units like that, building a secondary structure on a piece of property, is illegal. Renting out your guest cabin to a long-term renter is illegal. And so, these are the kind of things that can be changed. Let's get into the daily now. We're 36 minutes into the show. Haven't gone through all the phones. It's time to tee off. Shred the mainstream. Of course, we're going to get into horoscopes here too, so stay tuned. The big news in Jackson Hole, of course, is the eclipse coming up. Campers try their luck. Not happening, guys. National Park Service decided they're going to allow bottled water to be sold there after all. Local drunk driver still rotting in jail for killing a guy. Don't drive drunk, my friends. Not worth it. Fluffity fluff. It's all about the eclipse. In the opinion piece, wildfires in Montana. Spain, terror attack kills 13. Okay, big news there. A guy in a van drove up on a sidewalk and ran over a bunch of tourists. Interestingly, at the same time, there are reports in the paper about all these anti-tourist protests in Spain. Of course, who is to blame for it? It was clearly a terror attack intended to kill as many people as possible. Josep Luis Trapero, a senior police official, told a news conference late Thursday. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility, saying in a statement from its Amaq news agency that the attack was carried out by soldiers of the Islamic State in response to the extremist group's calls for followers to target countries participating in the coalition trying to drive it from Syria and Iraq. Okay, for those of you that don't know, ISIS, the Islamic State, funded, trained, and supported by who? The U.S. So that's funny, huh? Strange days. We got more coverage of Trump and his combative language. I have to say, I'm not going to go into the Charlottesville situation too much, but I have never seen a president so roundly attacked, so blatantly attacked by the mainstream as this guy, Donald Trump. The perfect fall guy. There's calls for his impeachment. It's all a distraction. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's designed to keep us thinking about nonsense instead of things that actually matter, right? What else? Climate change propaganda. Here we go. You can always see this. We've got an ad for green power here, a full page ad for green power. Maybe you guys would want to use a little less paper doing that. But, yeah. It's funny there. Mark Gill, hold the phone. Mark Gill putting up this actors and photographers wanted in Charlotte. Now that's Charlotte, North Carolina, right? Not Charlottesville, Virginia, correct? If so, that discredits my previous statements about the Charlottesville, I was citing zero hedge there. I wonder what these people are wanted for in Charlotte if it's not Charlottesville. Off the top of my head, I don't know how close those cities are to one another, but I could have been misinforming you. Seeing that link dropped in by Mark about Charlotte versus Charlottesville. Zero hedge could have dropped the ball on that one, and I could have dropped the ball too. So somebody drop in the comments there if I was wrong. I very well could have misinformed you. I'm not above correcting myself when I screw up. But moving on to the climate change propaganda. Earth yet again sizzled with unprecedented heat last month. The National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration said Thursday that Earth sweated to its second hottest month since record keeping began in 1890 at 61. Well, it's hot. But Earth's land temperatures in July were the hottest on record, passing July 2016's by 1 degree. Blah, blah, blah. Earlier this week, NASA calculated that July 2017 was a tad hotter than 2016, making it essentially a tie for all-time hottest month. Record heat was reported in Africa, Australia, parts of Asia, the Middle East, and the Indian Ocean. There is simply no denying the mounting evidence globally and regionally. The new climate normal is upon us now, said University of Oklahoma meteorology professor Jason Furtado, who wasn't part of the new report. Okay, it's very easy to get somebody with apparent credentials there, a meteorology professor who wasn't involved in the report, to say we're in the new climate normal. We're all going to die from CO2, right? I can't stress it enough. If we want to have a serious, educated public discussion about climate change, about humans causing climate change, we have to address weather modification. We have to address geoengineering. We have to address these ongoing programs that are clearly affecting our weather and climate. Okay? If you go on NASA's website, you go anywhere, you study climatology, they say one of the most important factors for climate change is the effect of clouds on weather and climate. Some clouds, like low, thick clouds, have a net cooling impact, whereas those high, wispy cirrus clouds that we so commonly see spewing out of the ass end of airplanes, obscuring the sky under this big, hazy cloud cover, those things let the sun through. They let most of the sunlight through, but then they trap the infrared that would normally radiate back out into space. Thus, for those high cirrus clouds, they have a net warming impact. Okay, this stuff is all laid out in geoengineering and weather modification patents, and people all over the world are documenting it every day. So to say that the new climate normal is upon us, to say that it's the hottest year on record, and to only blame CO2 for that is extremely misleading, right? Because people for the last 20 years, believe it or not, since about 97, people have been documenting the chemtrail phenomenon up in the skies. And these artificially induced cirrus clouds clearly have an impact on our weather and climate. Lord knows what else they're spraying up in the upper atmosphere. Moving along, fluffity fluff. Stocks take hit on Fed, Cisco News. What did the Fed say? Remember, the stock market's rigged, my friends. The Fed has been propping it up. That's why we're at all-time record highs in the U.S. when there really hasn't been much of an economic recovery for everybody else. U.S. stocks plunged Thursday as losses for Cisco Systems hurt technology companies, while Walmart declined. That's good news after its later quarterly report. Bank stocks also dropped as bond yields and interest rates sank for the second day. It was the second worst day for stocks this year. S&P down 1.5%, Dow Jones down 1.2%, NASDAQ down 1.9%, Russell 2000 down 1.8%. Bill Northey, Chief Investment Officer at the U.S. Bank Wealth Management, said that minutes released Wednesday from the Federal Reserve's policy meeting last month marked a little bit of change in tone and suggested that the central bank is becoming more cautious about raising interest rates. Okay. Investors were also assessing the state of President Trump's business-friendly agenda as he continues to face criticism over his comments after the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia last weekend. After he was elected, investors hoped his proposal for tax cuts and infrastructure spending would boost corporate profits. Most of the agenda has been a little bit distracted by non-economic factors, said Bill Northey. Okay, so it's funny how just a little change in tone from the Federal Reserve can affect the stock market, right? They don't even have to decide anything. They don't even have to announce anything. But if they just slightly change their verbiage, it could cause the stock market to crash. Who knows? Interestingly, too, here in the business, of course, they're pushing the Charlottesville thing. Trump's comments on Charlottesville, really not that inflammatory at all. But the mainstream sure scooped it up. Oh, the founder of Starbucks fears for the future of U.S. values. Nobody cares about that guy. If you want to talk about American values, like, why do you charge $5 for a fucking cup of coffee, dude? And now we're into the horoscopes. Again, I'm no astrologer. I'm no astrologer. I don't put that much stock in there, but I do read the horoscopes because it's in the paper. If you want your scope read, lay it on me. Mine is Taurus, the bull. And I, according to the Jackson Hole Daily, am having a 5-star day. What's it say? If you want your scope read, put it in the comments. Tell me your sign. Consider your alternatives carefully. A friend who might be flaky in one person's opinion could be reliable in another person's mind. Focusing on your long-term goals will allow you to take a leap of faith. You have Lady Luck riding on your shoulder. Tonight, follow the music. Anybody else want their scope read? I know. Pisces. Okay, Pisces. We're going Pisces. Karen J. Bowden, what are you, Scorpio? You like yours read too. I see your comment there, and I'll get into that a little later. But first, we're on to Pisces. 5-star day, fish people. One-on-one relating presents a new opportunity. Be flattered by someone else's sharing. Take a stand when dealing with a difficult situation that involves a friend or loved one. Consider walking away from this person and or situation. Janelle and Daniel. Tonight, lighten up the moment. We got any more? Karen J., I knew you were a Scorpio. Here we go, Scorpio. You're having a 5-star day too. Look at all of us having 5-star days. It's a good thing. Karen, you could be responsible for much more than what you're willing to admit. You have made a decision about the kind of life you want to live, and you make choices accordingly. You could be in a power struggle before you know it. Tonight, think entertainment. So there we go. Unless anybody else wants their Scorp read, we're done with the Scorps. Or the horoscopes. We read the Scorp. We're done with the scopes. Moving along here. Famed neuroscientist who studied Einstein dies. Marion Cleaves Diamond, a neuroscientist who studied Albert Einstein's brain and was one of the first to show that the brain can improve with enrichment, has died. UC Berkeley, where Diamond was a professor emerita in integrated biology, confirmed that Diamond died July 25th at her home in Oakland, California. She was 90, so they're only a month late with this news. In 1984, after receiving 4 blocks of the preserved brain of Einstein, she found that it had more support cells than average. In her work with rats, she showed that an enriched environment, toys and companions, changed the anatomy of the brain. She found that the brains of all animals, including humans, benefit from an enriched environment, and that impoverished environments can lower the capacity to learn. Okay? That's something that we all know commonsensically, right? If you live in a world where, if you're a refugee fleeing from, if you're a Yemeni refugee fleeing from the Saudi bombs, you're not living in an enriched environment. That's going to affect and lower your capacity to learn. If you're a kid in New York City who's homeless, going to public school, you're not living in an enriched environment, right? If you're a Venezuelan kid who's starving due to economic sanctions, not an enriched environment. If you're a North Korean kid who's starving due to sanctions or, whatever. I've never been to North Korea. I don't know how bad it is there. But the point is that if you raise children in a fucked up environment, you're going to have fucked up kids. And if you raise people in a good environment, they're going to do all right. Now we're on to sports. Of course, no shortage of sports news in the Jackson Hole Daily. We got guys throwing footballs. We got women hitting tennis balls with rackets. It's incredible how much great stuff is going on in the world of sports. Of course, none of it matters worth half a shit, right? Just sports, a huge distraction, a huge divisive force in our civilization. And I have to add that it teaches children, the glorification of fame and athletic prowess and wealth. It teaches children to want to be pretty fucked up things when they grow up. Weather, local weather here in Jackson Hole, it looks like it could be partly cloudy on the eclipse. Wouldn't it be a shame if no one could see it? Then we're through the fluff and we're on to the classifieds. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Man, there's a lot of jobs. 7 pages of jobs here in the Jackson Hole Daily. Of course, there's no place affordable for working class folks to live. That's why Jackson Hole is such a great microcosm of the macro problem, where the cost of living does not keep up with wages, where extreme wealth inequality continues consolidating into the hands of the wealthiest 1% of Americans as the rest of us get fucked over and out. Carla Ramirez looking for Capricorn, so I fled back to the scopes just for you. Here we go, Capricorn. 4-star day for you, Carla. Others continue to seek you out for various reasons. You might hear all sorts of ideas and requests for feedback and acknowledgement. Your perspective could change because of how someone presents him or herself. Tonight, make choices that ensure a fun, relaxing evening. Well, thank you all for tuning in as usual. We've got 81 comments, 30 viewers still, 29 viewers here at the end of the broadcast. I certainly appreciate all of you tuning in. I can't stress enough, thank you. Thank you for caring about these things, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the mainstream and let it ruin your life. It's so easy to get depressed by all the horrible news out there. But at the same time, if we just ran away from awareness and didn't try to make sense of it all, didn't try to raise the consciousness of all of humanity and inform people about what's really going on, then we're part of the problem too. So it's important to find that balance, to be aware but hopeful, to not let the mainstream media is designed to distract us, to divide us, to deceive us. There's all these D words that the mainstream media seeks to do. Disempower us. Whereas by critically analyzing the mainstream media and expressing our opinions about it, we become empowered instead of disempowered, right? So stay active, stay healthy, take care of yourself and the people you love, and, keep being the change. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all of you. Max Mogren, Wake Up News, signing off today, August 18th, 2017. I know I said I was going to take the day off, but I lied. And again, I have to reiterate there that the headline on reports emerging of paid protesters in Charlottesville, I've got to look into it, but that Zero Hedge article that I cited could be misleading. Probably should have read it more carefully if they were looking for paid protesters in Charlotte, North Carolina, instead of Charlottesville, Virginia. But then again, maybe the next big spectacle protest We're going to see where the police stand down as the alt-right and the alt-left get into it. Very well could be right outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Who knows? I do know that there's something going on in Durham, North Carolina right now, and it's probably not that important. So thank you all for tuning in. It's your boy Max signing off. One love. Peace.